Welcome to the Curious Route, where we explore the forgotten corners of history that shaped our modern world. Today, we're diving into a story that's equal parts treasure hunt, scientific marvel, and human tragedy. We're talking about rare mineral discoveries that sparked entire towns into existence, only for those same communities to vanish as quickly as they appeared. By the end of this video, you'll understand why some of the rarest minerals on Earth can be both a blessing and a curse, and why dozens of once thriving mining towns now sit empty, reclaimed by nature. So stick around, because this journey takes us from glittering underground caverns to the eerie silence of abandoned main streets. The story of rare mineral discoveries and ghost towns really begins in the mid-1800s. During the height of mining fever across the American West, Australia, and parts of South America. But what most people don't realize is that it wasn't just gold and silver driving people to the most remote corners of the planet. There were minerals so rare, so valuable for specific industrial applications, that their discovery could transform a dusty patch of wilderness into a booming town of thousands within months. We're talking about minerals like cinnabar, which contains mercury, uraninite for uranium, or rare earth elements like monazite and bastnasite. These weren't pretty gemstones for jewelry. These were the building blocks of thermometers, batteries, nuclear reactors, and eventually, smartphones. And wherever these minerals were found in abundance, a mining town would spring up almost overnight. Let me paint you a picture of how this typically happened. A prospector, often working alone or with a small team, would stumble upon an unusual rock formation. Maybe the stones had a strange color, an unusual weight, or they'd cause a Geiger counter to click rapidly. Word would spread, sometimes through official mining reports, other times through saloon gossip and telegraph messages. Within weeks, miners would begin arriving. Then came the entrepreneurs, the merchants, the saloon owners, the brothel madams, the doctors, and the undertakers. A tent city would transform into a town with wooden buildings, a main street, a church, maybe even a small newspaper. At their peak, some of these mining towns housed 5, 10, even 20,000 people. They had schools, theaters, hospitals, and all the trappings of civilization. But here's the catch that makes this story so fascinating. These towns were built on a foundation as unstable as the mine shafts beneath them. The problem with rare mineral mining towns was simple economics and geology. Unlike agricultural communities that could sustain themselves indefinitely, or trading posts positioned along permanent routes, mining towns had an expiration date. That date was determined by one simple question: how long until the mineral runs out? For some towns, the answer was decades. For others, it was just a few years. And when the mines closed, everything else collapsed like dominoes. The mining company would pull out first, taking their equipment and their capital. Then the miners would leave, seeking work elsewhere. Without miners spending money, the merchants would close their shops. The saloons would shut down. The doctors would move to places where they had patients. Families would pack their belongings onto wagons or trains and simply leave. Within months, a town of thousands could be reduced to a few dozen holdouts. Within years, it might be completely empty, except for the wind howling through broken windows. Now let me tell you about some specific examples that really drive this point home. One of the most dramatic is Bodie, California. In 1876, a cave-in at the Bunker Hill mine revealed an incredibly rich vein of gold and silver ore. Within 3 years, Bodie exploded from a small camp to a city of nearly 10,000 people. It had 65 saloons, numerous brothels, gambling halls, a railroad, and a reputation as one of the wildest towns in the West. But the really interesting part is what they also found there: rare telluride minerals containing gold, which were scientifically fascinating and metallurgically challenging. These minerals required special processing techniques, which meant higher costs. By 1881, just 5 years after the boom began, production was already declining. By 1886, a major fire destroyed much of the business district. The town limped along, but by the 1940s, Bodie was essentially abandoned. Today, it's preserved as a state historic park in a state of arrested decay, a snapshot of a moment in time when rare mineral wealth created and then destroyed a community. But Bodie isn't even close to being the most extreme example. Let me tell you about Fordlandia in Brazil. Now, this wasn't technically a mineral mining town, but it follows the same pattern, and the story is too incredible not to share. In 1928, Henry Ford established this town deep in the Amazon rainforest to harvest latex from rubber trees, which contained rare properties needed for his car manufacturing. He built a complete American town in the middle of the jungle, complete with hospitals, schools, a golf course, and suburban-style houses. At its peak, it housed thousands of workers. But Ford didn't understand the local ecology. The rubber trees were plagued by disease, and by 1945 the project was abandoned. The town still exists as ruins being slowly consumed by the jungle, a testament to how quickly nature reclaims human ambition. For a true rare mineral ghost town, we need to talk about Centralia, Washington. No, wait, I meant to say Silver Peak, Nevada, which boomed in the early 1900s when massive deposits of lithium-rich brine were discovered. Lithium wasn't valuable then like it is now for batteries, so the town eventually declined. But the real jaw-dropper is Gilman, Colorado. This town was built around 1886 when miners discovered incredibly rich deposits of zinc, silver, lead, and the rare mineral smithsonite. The town clung to the side of a mountain, connected by narrow roads and even narrower bridges. At its height in the 1970s, it still had about 300 residents. But decades of mining had contaminated the groundwater with toxic heavy metals, including rare elements like cadmium and arsenic. In 1984, the EPA ordered the entire town evacuated due to toxic contamination. The eviction order remains in place today. Gilman is completely abandoned, frozen in time, with cars still parked in driveways and belongings still in homes. It's one of the most photographed ghost towns in America because it looks like the apocalypse happened and everyone just vanished. Here's where the story gets even more interesting. Many of these abandoned mining towns are now environmental disasters. The rare minerals that made them valuable often came with toxic companions like mercury, arsenic, lead, and radioactive elements. The mining techniques of the 19th and early 20th centuries were primitive and environmentally destructive. Tailings ponds full of toxic sludge were left behind. Abandoned mine shafts filled with contaminated water. In places like Pitcher, Oklahoma, which mined lead and zinc for decades, toxic waste piles contaminated the soil and water so severely that the entire town was evacuated in 2009. The land is now a Superfund site. The irony is profound. The rare minerals that created these towns also made them uninhabitable. But not all rare mineral ghost towns are environmental catastrophes. Some simply became obsolete. Take the town of Terlingua, Texas, which boomed in the early 1900s due to massive deposits of cinnabar, the ore that produces mercury. Mercury was crucial for processing gold and silver, for making scientific instruments, and later for industrial applications. The Chisos Mining Company operated there, and at its peak, Terlingua had thousands of residents. But by the 1940s, synthetic alternatives to mercury were developed, and the demand plummeted. The mines closed in 1946, and Terlingua was abandoned. Unlike many ghost towns, though, Terlingua has been partially resettled by artists, retirees, and tourists. It's now a quirky destination with a population of about 100, proving that some ghost towns can find second lives. The pattern repeats across the globe. In Australia, there's Wittenoom, which mined blue asbestos, technically a rare fibrous mineral, from the 1930s to 1966. When the health dangers of asbestos became clear, the town was gradually abandoned. Today it's officially delisted from maps, and the government actively discourages anyone from visiting due to lingering asbestos fibers in the air. In Namibia, Kolmanskop was a diamond mining town that thrived from 1908 to the 1950s. When richer diamond deposits were found elsewhere, everyone left. Now the Namib Desert is slowly reclaiming the buildings, with sand dunes pouring through doors and windows, creating surreal, haunting images. What can we learn from these rare mineral ghost towns? First, they remind us that boom and bust economics are nothing new. The same patterns we see in modern industries, where a technology or resource is hot until it's not, played out a century ago in these remote locations. Second, they show us the environmental cost of resource extraction. Many of these sites are still contaminated decades or even a century after being abandoned. Third, they're powerful reminders of human impermanence. These weren't temporary camps. They were real communities where people were born, grew up, fell in love, raised families, and died. They had dreams of permanence, yet nothing remains but crumbling buildings and rusted equipment. There's something deeply fascinating about wandering through a ghost town. I've visited several, and the experience is always eerie and moving. You walk down a main street where thousands of footsteps once echoed, where children played and merchants hawked their wares, and now there's only silence. You peer into abandoned buildings and see the detritus of daily life. A rusted stove, a broken chair, faded wallpaper, maybe a child's toy. These weren't just economic enterprises. They were living, breathing communities that had the misfortune of being built on a finite resource. The modern world still creates mining towns, of course. Rare earth elements, crucial for modern electronics, are mined in remote locations in China, Africa, and elsewhere. Lithium mining for batteries is creating new boom towns in South America and Australia. Some of these will thrive and diversify their economies. But history suggests that many will follow the same trajectory as Bodie, Gilman, and Terlingua. They'll boom spectacularly, decline gradually, and eventually sit empty. Monuments to human ambition and the finite nature of mineral wealth. So the next time you hold your smartphone, remember that its rare earth elements might have come from a mining operation that could one day become a ghost town. The next time you hear about a mining boom somewhere remote, remember that booms always lead to busts. And if you ever get the chance to visit one of these abandoned mining towns, I highly recommend it. There's something profound about standing in the empty shell of what was once someone's hometown, their main street, their place of belonging. It puts our own communities, our own lives, in perspective. Nothing is permanent, not even towns built on rare treasures pulled from the earth. Thanks for watching The Curious Route today. If you found this story as fascinating as I did researching it, drop a comment below telling me which ghost town you'd most want to visit. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you do not miss our next journey into the curious corners of history and the world. Until next time, keep exploring the roads less traveled.